I saw an interesting tweet you sent out today, and it said that, like, basically, no worries, I've been broken up with my girlfriend for 5 weeks now and everything's okay. Which led me to think about what we are in terms of, if you were a big, Hollywood star or TV star and you broke up with someone, no one would take to Twitter. You're not gonna see, Scarlett Johansson go to Twitter and say, "Hey everyone, I just broke up with Ryan Reynolds, but I'm okay." So when you tweet something like that, or in general when people tweet something like that, their personal lives, you learn, or at least you see that being a quote unquote celebrity on the internet means something different than what I think celebrity meant before. So when you tweeted that, did you see that as a responsibility to your fans that they had to know what was going on, or was it something to that's just who you are?
In my particular case, I'm personally a very public person, and I only learned that when I started to have friends and even relationships with people that would be self-proclaimed private people. Mm-hmm. I'm always kind of the guy that, like, if something's going on in my life, I want to talk about it, joke about it, share it with other people. And in a way, that's how I relate to people, is by, saying, here's what's going on with me. And they go, oh, I've totally been there. But in this case, it was the fact, I tried, again, my girlfriend and I broke up 5 weeks ago. And at first I felt like it was too raw to talk about, because it's kind of not unlike tweeting that somebody died. Like, it's a clearly raw and emotional situation, and nobody quite knows how to handle you. And when you're a YouTube comedy brand, that is really tricky. It's kind of like the smaller, less impactful version of saying, well, guys, I have this awful disease. Like, it makes people suddenly, it might pollute their ability to just see you as a funny clown person. So I didn't talk about it for a while. And then I realized, I'm starting to dip my toes back into dating. I'm starting to, like, in the same way that when you're in a relationship, you don't necessarily want to be public about the ways in which you notice women who aren't your girlfriend and things like that. Sure. But, like, I found myself starting to draft all these tweets that sounded very bachelory, and I kind of went, if I don't sort of just tell people that I'm single, then I could have a lot of what I call the silent judgment of Twitter, which mm-hmm. is the loud people are the assholes. The loud people are the trolls, and a lot of times they're your biggest fans. They're just giving you crap about it. But the danger online is when you have the silent judgment, which is people that disapprove of you as a person, and they unsubscribe or they unfollow or they disengage. And I thought, I got to be true to myself. I have things that I want to tweet about in my life, even though I'm almost always framing them as a joke. I still do a lot of, I do post a lot on Twitter about stuff in my actual life. And I just figured if I got that out there, it would kind of, even if somebody didn't see that tweet, maybe if I, end up tweeting about some date or something that I've got or something along those lines, and somebody goes, oh, what the hell? I thought you were in a relationship. Maybe somebody else who noticed will tell them, no, they broke up. Like, just getting the word out so that the stuff they're going to see, particularly in my social media stream, is, congruent with their understanding of me as a person. And it was definitely a choice, like it was, I felt like it was finally far enough away from the event that nobody would think I was still, the things people assume you are right after a breakup, which is in pretty bad shape. Mm-hmm. So that was my thinking behind that. It was mostly just so that I could tweet in the way that I want to tweet based on what's going on in my life now, as opposed to before the breakup.
So that's the last thing you said, tweet in the way you wanted to tweet. So it's almost as if you had to get to a point to make that decision that this is how I can now tweet about this, which speaks to, I guess, not just what you want to share, but also your brand. And you did mention that you being, I guess, personal with people, that's just who you are. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, for you personally in the Brentalfloss brand, how much of that is that's what the brand is versus you, I guess, you know what I'm saying? Like, you this is how you are. You're bold, you're open about things. And so if that's part of what your brand is that an obligation then to let your fans know things like that versus keeping things specifically private. Because for me, I keep, I'd say 95% of my personal life private. But obviously there are people on YouTube where it's front and center, whether or not their spouse or girlfriend shows up in their videos a lot, whether or not they tweet publicly back and forth. So I don't know if you want to go into that if it's even subconscious, that division versus the integration of this is my brand, but also my personal life.
Well, I think that what you're hitting on is something I find very interesting, which is how somebody's personality is or is not related to their brand. Let's take a great example, which is the Angry Video Game Nerd. James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd, was one of my biggest influences, I'm sure one of yours, into getting into the video game YouTube genre, or at least trying out the creation of videos about video games. And when I met him in 2009, I'd been a fan of his for at least a year and a half. I was starstruck, and he was strangely quiet and not animated and not upbeat or anything. He was just kind of a normal dude, and I really took it personally, like he was just kind of blowing me off. I've later realized, later realized that James the person is so different from the nerd character, and you see a lot of that on YouTube, and occasionally you see people who are being completely themselves. Now, I don't think anybody on YouTube can be their entire self, because, you know, we edit, we like to show people a certain side of ourselves, which is exactly what people do, you know, in life. Everybody, you know, not everybody wants to tell everybody everything at any given time. I guess what I'm saying is that for me, I've always had a bit of a struggle with how much of the Brentalfloss brand is me, the person, and how much of it is this persona that's kind of like my slightly darker, slightly more, you know, vulgar Mr. Hyde. And I think that some people just fall into a brand where there's a very clear-cut division, and a lot of people don't. For instance, you know, JonTron, who I assumed upon watching his videos, particularly the JonTron videos, I didn't get much into Game Grumps, but I assumed that he was a really outgoing, constantly joking guy. And it's not that he's like some sad sack, it's that like there's a clear delineation between when he's on camera and when he's just being a normal dude. And it is interesting. For me personally, I think that I am the kind of person, like I was saying, that if something's going on with me, I don't really hold back talking about it, because my theory in life is that pretty much everybody has had every emotional experience by the time they're 3 years old. I mean, yeah, you know what? When a big bully kid takes away your candy and you're 3 years old, it's not the same as, you know, like somebody in your life dying. But in that moment, the betrayal, the unfairness of the universe, the just loud crying and collapsing into a heap, it's the exact same thing. We experience the entirety of the emotional spectrum by a very young age. And so everyone can relate to everyone else if the other person just, you know, articulates what's going on with them in a clear way. For me, growing up, I learned that I could make friends that way, and I could, you know, be well liked by basically being very much on my sleeve and not afraid to just talk about what's really going on with me, with the assumption that pretty much everybody's experienced that in one way or another. Even if they don't admit to themselves there's a connection, I knew. And, you know, that has gotten me in trouble a few times. But personally, I'd rather be somebody who's not afraid to talk about the elephant in the room and take my lumps when I fail or when I take it too far. I'd rather be that than someone who I just don't think I'd be happy if I felt like I had to hold a lot of stuff in all the time.
So, but that's where we're at, though, in terms of what I like to call I know e-celebrity, where there are people that say it's almost like acting, like James Rolfe, when he's a video game nerd, he is acting.
Right.
Yet there are people, obviously, that at least back in 2007 to 2008, didn't understand that he was an actor portraying a role. And so now it's almost, to me, like you have to make a conscious choice starting out on YouTube with your brand, whether or not you're going to be acting or whether or not you're going to be more yourself. And I try to pull off doing parts of both. I don't know if it's been to my detriment or not, being, doing stuff like Flea Market Madness or this, where this is me, this is who I am myself, versus doing Pat the NES Punk, which is at least an exaggeration, if not I'm acting in those, and whether or not people get confused by that sort of delineation. So yeah, it's very interesting that's where you're at now, where it's either I don't know personally whether it's because the audiences are they're younger, they're preteens and teens that understand that maybe they don't understand that people are putting on acting videos versus this is just who they are, and that's basically almost two different types of, I guess, YouTube stars to me at this point.
Right. It's the same thing as reality TV. It's like, I think everybody at any given time chooses what sides of themselves to show, in the same way that producers and editors of a reality show will decide how to edit in a way that implies a narrative and a certain character trait in a real person who's on the show. But I do feel like, I used to think back in the day, the YouTube community had a really, really keen eye for authenticity. I think that's gone away as there's been more commercialization of YouTube, and it's become a little bit more like old media, a little bit more like TV. And, this is not to say that everyone on YouTube is some big liar. It's just kind of like, in the same way that in high school, everyone has their deep inner self, and everyone has the person they're going to be around their friends and around, in the cafeteria at lunch. It's the exact same thing. It's that some people... And a lot of times it really just has to do with whatever you do that works. For me, I think if I had just happened to, in some other part of the multiverse, if I had just happened to create a character in 2008 that did very well but was nothing like me, I probably would have stuck with that. And then you'd have this very clear delineation, kind of like Keith Apicary, Angry Video Game Nerd. But what's tricky is the fact that, for me, there's a lot of the Brentalfloss character that is the guy I'd like to be all the time, but I just couldn't get away with. Particularly in my live shows, are a lot of me just totally making fun of everything that happens. And in a way that, if I wasn't on stage and if I wasn't Brentalfloss, would be rude or would be blunt or whatever. Like, that's an inner part of me that maybe gets me in trouble sometimes, but there's something about it that I enjoy somewhere in my psyche. It's sort of a, like I said earlier, kind of a Mr. Hyde that in the right context, I can let it out. But I do feel like, anyone listening, when you're watching YouTube, like, just keep in mind that somebody's choosing which parts of themselves to share with you and how much of that to share with you at any given time, and that they are all real people, regardless of how much of themselves is in their online presentation.
So you touched on, I guess, you using the Brentalfloss character act as almost like an outlet for this different part of your persona.
Right.
This is so, in a way, then maybe that's where we're at, where that's like the new sort of. I was thinking about it today as almost as if us YouTubers, we're almost like a new sort of wave of vaudeville, in a way. Where
absolutely, that's a great analogy.
Where we sort of we put on these acts, but we're not really acting. If that's really, I guess, the best way to describe it. We go around, we do these. I guess we have these brands. We do the same like a vaudeville act for those of you that are under 103 years old. Vaudeville acts would basically tour the same act around city to city, whether it was comedy, music, what have you. That's how the Three Stooges started. That's how the Marx Brothers started. So what my analogy for YouTube is that we are doing this sort of show that's usually consistent, and I guess we are just putting it around the world though at the same time. But then again, we're also going out to these conventions, like Brent and I were just at one in Portland the past week, and we are doing these panels, we are doing these shows, and we're taking our act on the road. I guess I don't know where I'm spinning out of control with this. I guess it's the perception of what that is, because vaudeville was always looked at as being lower than acting, even in, I guess, the teens and 1920s when Hollywood became a thing. It was always looked at as, well, you want to get out of vaudeville and actually, act on screen.
Right. It just comes down to what you're doing. It's kind of like if you go see a magic show, you've got the magician, you've got the assistant. Now, how much of the actual personalities of the magician and the assistant are in their live show varies greatly, but they still have the roles that they're in. So really, whatever role your YouTube brand puts you in kind of has a form to it. Kind of has limitations and opportunities. And so, like what you've done with the reviews, with the actual Pat the NES Punk videos, it allows you to be a little bit more of an animated, colorful, kind of heightened character, a slightly more cartoony version of yourself. But there's real you in there as well.
Sure.
That's sort of, the limitations of a review show kind of are pretty open as far as, is it a character, is it a real person, and where does the stuff that works derive from? And it's different with everybody. Sometimes somebody's just such a unique personality, you'll watch them say whatever. Other times it's really because of their analysis or their deep understanding of something. There's so many variables. But I do think it has to do with the form you're working in. And what's really interesting is how different, sometimes when I'll meet a vlogger, how different they are in person, because you assume vlogging is the height of honesty. But then you look at like something that a lot of people forget, which is like the Lonely Girl debacle, which in, I want to say 2005 or 6, in the very early days of YouTube, they basically created an internet reality show that they didn't tell anybody was
That's right.
pre-written.
That's right.
And,
wow, that's almost like the Dark Ages.
Well, and it just shows you how we haven't changed that much. The reason people believed it was because who would go and write a show starring one kind of regular-looking person with a crappy camera in her obviously teenage bedroom?
Mm-hmm.
But they exploited that fact and made interesting drama before they were found out. It's not unlike the Blair Witch Project, how like they passed it off as real until it came out that it wasn't. But it still was great entertainment, especially when people thought it was real. So it kind of like, toes that line. But I think we've gotten to a point in YouTube where anybody with a brain pretty much knows that there is a line of separation, and that the second the cameras go off, you might see a different person, or at least different shades or dimensions of a fully realized human being.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting state where that's starting to, I guess, with people going out to conventions and meeting people, you start to realize that yeah, it's a lot of it's acting, especially the biggest YouTube. I'd say the vast majority of those huge YouTube channels, those million plus, that it's vaudeville act. That's where we're at.
Sure.
And it'd just be interesting to see if that's really going to be the dominant, I guess, sort of, we see PewDiePie with 28 million subscribers. He's putting on a vaudeville act. Right. And that's what people, I guess, want. That's what sells versus just being yourself and being honest. I don't know. It's hard to know what's going to work overall, but at least that's what is shaping out. I mean, YouTube hasn't even been around for 10 years yet. And that's sort of the direction, I guess, it's going. So, I guess, so what's on the horizon for Brentalfloss? What do we have going forward?
Well, as far as videos, I'm working on a lot of stuff. I took a little month off earlier this year to kind of collect some thoughts about some games. One of the biggest challenges with me is that most of the games that I really loved as a kid that really stuck with me, or that the music of which really stuck with me, most of those games I've already done something from those games in video form. I think my complete music video playlist is something like 60 videos now. So now what I'm having to do is go, okay, what are the fans asking for? They're asking for me to do my take on a game that they love, but it's tricky if the game that they love is a 30-hour game or a 50-hour game or one of those Skyrim open, sandbox games where you could honestly spend 500 hours playing and still not understand the entirety of it. In my particular workflow, there's this big kind of crunch to try to research the games in an amount of time that allows me to authentically make jokes about them and understand them. Because, for me, my biggest fear is phoning it in and having somebody go, you definitely did not play that game. You're full of crap. So even though I'm not probably as enthusiastic of a daily gamer as some of the people who watch me, I still feel like I have to understand, the basic idea and the details of a game in order to make jokes about it, because otherwise they'll sniff out that authenticity or lack thereof.
Do you find yourself struggling more or less now with the needs of the audience versus your artistic needs, or are you trying to find that sweet spot in every one of your video projects that you do at this point, if it's even possible?
It is a challenge, because I know that my core audience, so many of them are 90s babies, plenty of them are 2000s babies, and so I know that if I do, for instance, Bubble Bobble, that's going to have to be a very concept heavy song. And what I mean by that is it can't rely on the viewer's prior knowledge of Bubble Bobble, because
Sure.
even though I'm sure a lot of the kids have seen it in an arcade or just stumbled across stuff about it on YouTube, they're probably not going to be as intimately familiar with it as they were like the Wii Shop channel music from that video I did, or Mario Sunshine, which was for a lot of my viewers their first major Mario game. So there is, for me, a generational pressure to focus on games that would have existed in the lifetime of my core audience, which really their age doesn't change, but the years keep going by. So suddenly I'm feeling pressure to do stuff from the DS, stuff from the Wii. I did a BioShock song, which did very well, and that surprised me until I realized, oh, of course, my viewers, that's more in their wheelhouse than, say, Little Nemo from, the early 90s. It's, and also I think that my artistic desires are way more broad in their spectrum than the kind of stuff I tend to get away with as Brentalfloss. But, everything you do has genre limitations. And it's very hard to bend genres. One great example of that is like how Cabin in the Woods a year or two ago really combined horror and comedy in a way that you rarely see, because I was actually scared at some points and really laughing at other points. In the same way, I want to do all kinds of storytelling and all kinds of emotional tones, but I know what works in the genre of this little thing that I stumbled upon. So I know that most of the time I should stick within that. I guess the way to sum this up is just to say there are very many variables, but I just because of the way art works, especially when you have a series going, you do have to pay attention to what the fans want, because at some point, if you're just shooting in the dark and doing every different shade of what you like doing, then it's kind of like being a restaurant that's going to have a different food item every time people show up. You've got to be just that. You've got to be so much better to do that and still satisfy people than a place that has great burgers that everyone comes from miles around to have this burger,